Hello and welcome to Football Daily, where today we're looking at Frenkie de Jong, newly linked with Chelsea after Manchester United seemingly gave up hope of landing him. To be honest, we didn't expect the West Londoners to get round to the midfield this summer. Last year they handed 2,000 minutes to Malang Sarr and Trevor Chalobah, as well as 25 starts to Marcos Alonso, so they were already in the market for new defensive blood, and the Bosman losses of Rudiger and Christensen and departures of Lukaku and Werner meant the Blues went into this summer fully focused on filling out the front and back lines. That could have been fine if they'd wrapped up their preferred targets quickly, but failed moves for Ake, Ligt, Kounde and Kimpembe dragged the process out, and with the recruitment department gutted by Todd Boehly's rejig, especially the June exit of long-term chief exec and transfer veteran Marina Granovskaya, the club could only work on so many deals at once. That meant that when Boehly devoted himself to ultimately unsuccessful negotiations with Raphinha and Ousmane Dembele, the Blues lost valuable time in the window, and they could now be 5 fixtures into the season before their squad is complete. An enormous issue given Tottenham's 6-man shopping splurge and Arsenal's £120 million overhaul. So with all this chaos enveloping Stamford Bridge, one area of the squad remains totally neglected: the midfield. Chelsea fans have been largely bullish on the club's engine room, with Conor Gallagher returning from a stellar loan at Palace and the possibility of a swoop for Declan Rice around the corner in 2023. But the centre of the park is undeniably weak. Last year, Mateo Kovacic was one of the best midfielders in the league, but started just 16 league fixtures, while Kante played under 1,800 minutes and saw big declines in pressures and defensive actions. That meant Jorginho was the only true CM to see regular minutes, and by the back end of the season, Tuchel was forced to bring Ruben Loftus-Cheek back into the fold, with the Englishman earning more minutes than Ziyech, Pulisic or Timo Werner. The situation could be worse still this season. Kante is 31 and has played just 55% of available game time over the last 3 campaigns, while Jorginho is 30 and can't afford to lose a step. So if they stick with this group of players, it's hard to see how Chelsea bridge the gap to the top 2, both of which put up roughly double Chelsea's plus 31 expected goals difference across 2021-22. And that's led Boehly to Frenkie de Jong, who is stuck in an impossible situation, deciding between a Barcelona side refusing to pay his wages and a Manchester United team years away from challenging for major honours. What exactly would Frenkie bring to Chelsea? How could we expect him to play under Tuchel, and would he be enough to cement third place, or perhaps more, for the West London outfit? Let's see if we can find out. Tuchel's preference for the back 3 means there are only 2 true midfield slots in the 11, and we can broadly break these into 2 categories: the sitting or Jorginho role and the dynamic running role. As those names suggest, the former has a lot less depth. While Kovacic, Kante, Gallagher and even Mount can feasibly be the driving force in midfield, the game controller, who marshals the zone ahead of the back line, only has one natural inhabitant. And while we've been critical of Jorginho since he came to England, he's undeniably well suited to the job. The Italian has played over 2,000 minutes in every campaign in London, and while his passing numbers are not as insane as they were at Napoli, when he completed around 11 progressive passes a game and 15 passes into the final third, he's still one of the best deep distributors in the league, with 5.5 progressive passes and 6 into the final third, ranking 21st and 19th respectively among all Premier League players last season. Like Jorginho, he was far more productive at his previous club, but the Dutchman's numbers in both categories are almost identical to Jorginho's at 5.6 and 5.5, and he also creates more chances per game at 1.5 to 1, a figure which outstrips Kante and Kovacic too. Shockingly, he's even more reliable when it comes to hitting the target, matching Jorginho for overall pass accuracy with 90%, but finding his man with an amazing 86% of his long balls compared to 72% for the 30-year-old, which would maintain or even improve the pipeline to the wingbacks. An important feature for Tuchel, with only Manchester United producing a larger percentage of their shots from the flanks than Chelsea in 2021-22. Jorginho has upped his defensive output every year since he came to Stamford Bridge, peaking last season with over 5 tackles and interceptions a match, while Frenkie has been on the opposite trajectory, sliding down to a genuinely awful 2.4 per 90, placing him in the bottom 15% of midfielders. You also might be shocked to learn that the allegedly immobile Jorginho presses more, 19 times a match to de Jong's 11, but we still think there's reason to hope FDJ has something to offer. At Ajax he made around 3.5 defensive actions per 90, but if you adjust that for possession, with Ajax having close to 2/3 of the ball every game, it comes out to 6.2 per 90, actually placing de Jong in the top 5% of midfielders. And simply having someone quicker and more imposing than Jorginho in the middle could help too, tempting opponents to try their luck on the wings instead. Frenkie would also have plenty of protection in this system. Kante and Kovacic both won possession over 4 times a game last year, while in Mount and Gallagher, Chelsea have players who rated in the top 20% and top 7% in their position for closing down opponents last season, with Gallagher actually leading the entire Premier League for pressures with a mammoth 783. A full 81 ahead of second place on the list. De Jong would also have a complement of mobile defenders behind him, with Reece James and Marc Cucurella frequently tucking into midfield, James taking the most touches in the middle third of any PL fullback outside of City and Liverpool last term, and Cucurella similarly active in the centre, as well as rating extremely well for pressing and ball recoveries. Defending is a group activity, and with Frenkie as the 6, it's not hard to imagine the group being stronger. But what about a more advanced role? Given his stop-start campaign last year, and the general forgettability of Chelsea's season, it's not shocking that many people didn't notice the changes in N'Golo Kante's game. But having joined Chelsea as a destroyer in 2016, the Frenchman has become more skillful, refined and influential on the ball throughout his spell in London, and last season is the high watermark for the shift. As we've said, Kante's defensive actions came down substantially during 21-22, which could be an indicator of his athleticism dwindling, but at least there was a trade-off. Kante made big leaps in progressive passes from 4.2 to 6, in chances created from under 1 to 1.2, in progressive running from 4.7 to a huge 7.5, and in touches, hitting 77 per 90, the highest figure he's managed since his move from Leicester City. Looking at the broader tactical setup, this makes sense. While Tuchel needs defensive presence in the middle, he's already fielding an extra defender by playing a back 3, which naturally means sacrificing an attacker. So he needs his midfielders to do plenty of ball progression to keep things moving downfield, and Frenkie could be a natural fit for this role, with his statistical profile a flipped version of Kante's. Kante is a great defender who has learned to be good at ball progression, while FDJ, at least in his Barcelona incarnation, is a great ball progressor who does just enough defence. In his final year at Ajax, the Dutchman was the top midfielder in StatsBomb's database for moving the ball into the final third, and even in a mixed bag campaign for Barcelona last year, where he filled in at centre half, he still placed in the top 9% of midfielders for carrying the ball forward and the top 6% for taking it into the final third, while he was also outstanding at offering himself as an option to players in deeper positions, receiving about 5 progressive passes per 90 minutes, which again places him in the top 9% of similar footballers. There's reason to believe he could offer more here too. The managerial upheaval at Barca and general inability to plan ahead has wrought havoc with De Jong's development, with his previously exceptional dribbling largely nixed in favour of traditional pass and move. Having beaten his man a colossal 3 times a match in the Netherlands, which would have ranked first in Europe for midfielders last term, he's dropped to 1.6, then 1.4, and now to just 0.9 take-ons each game, with the only sign that he was once a world beater in this stat the fact that he still completes 70% of the dribbles he attempts. If Tuchel can revive 2018-19 Frenkie, he'll have some player on his hands, and make no mistake, Chelsea still have a way to go to match the territorial dominance of their rivals. City spent 38% of their game time last year in the final third, Liverpool were on 35%, but Chelsea managed just 31%, with Arsenal better at penning in opponents. Chelsea's tally of 41 passes into the final third each match was third in the Prem, but still 10 back on the big two, and while they actually topped Liverpool to rank second for running the ball into the opposition's part of the field, they still got it into the box less and were closer to Arsenal, Spurs and United for chances created than Pep and Klopp's teams. So big jumps are required both in moving possession upfield and turning it into goal opportunities once it gets there. Frenkie could help with both. The great advantage of signing a player as skillful and athletic as De Jong is that you don't have to assign him to either one of these roles permanently. The Dutchman can, in the long run, do both. He'd also offered Chelsea some much needed resilience, having missed just 7 games in his last 2 league seasons and overall averaging 48 appearances a year since 2018. And at least in London he'd get paid his wages, rather than having to face unfair pressure to reduce his contract to allow the club to embark on another foolish spending spree, as he spent this summer enduring in Spain. Close this one and Chelsea will emerge from the window with a squad which is still clearly third best in England, and go into 2023 with a stronger hand in Declan Rice negotiations. Let's hope the De Jong remontada starts here. So that's our take on Frenkie de Jong to Chelsea, but what do you think? Would he suit the Blues or do they have better options? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, drop us a like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and you'll never miss an upload.